gonna get spicy. Are we gonna have to beep out my fuck?
No.
Okay.
Welcome. We're TableGoth, a group of tabletop gaming enthusiasts, gothic aficionados, and today we're here to do a tutorial on PvP. And PvP is player versus player. Usually it means combat, but I think we'll be talking more of the player versus player overall tension today. And I am an expert at this. My name is Bully.
I'm also an expert at this, and my name is Mandy Rose.
I'm great at tension and antagonizing.
Antagonizing. What?
Yeah. So anyway, today is all about PvP. Pretty much any roleplay game, obviously, but I think it's almost not encouraged, but it's more thematically fitting in the world of darkness, particularly a Vampire the Masquerade setting, than it would be in most typical, very much teamwork-heavy games. Because there's that sort of tension, that balance of everyone's playing an individual, but you're also playing a coterie. And a thing that's really fun about Vampire and is the politics and the loyalties and all the different ways to get in trouble and to screw each other over and just to be generally sneaky bad people. And while usually you want to do that against NPCs, I feel like it's inevitable that some of your players' characters are going to have disagreements. And while usually in an adventuring party, those disagreements are going to be like, oh, how do we solve this problem? I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to do it this way. In Vampire, it becomes a lot more of like, oh, my personal morals in this or this. And especially it's a game about humanity.
Right.
So you're all playing different people on a monster scale. You're not all playing heroes, you're all playing bad people. So obviously the different levels of bad, how quickly one vampire becomes comfortable with being a vampire compared to another. There's so many things that go on that's are really interesting, but are definitely going to create intercoterie tension.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And there's a few ways of dealing with that. We'll stick to the tension before we get to the more extreme versions of the tension, which is punching and shooting and all of that. But I think the tension is good. I think that's one of my favorite things about this game.
Yeah.
But like any game, you're going to want to do a session 0 to sort of figure out the PvP level you're comfortable with and the player level you're comfortable with. I would say with new players, I'd probably discourage a really backstabby game because people are learning the game. And it's hard to learn a game and with a group of people while also being against a group of people. You as a storyteller are easier or can do a better job presenting obstacles and foes than new players. I mean, some may be naturals, being antagonistic, but others might not be. They might get upset about stuff like that. So like I said, check with your players first to see what level they're comfortable with. Some old school players or some people just really like that sort of game where you're sort of against each other but trying to find a way to work with each other. That could be a lot of fun. And if you have the right group for it, meaning all of them are cool with that and all of them enjoy that, you can have an almost like very PvP heavy, again, more tension based, not where they're attacking each other constantly, but they're slowly sort of moving pieces in the background against each other. Even if your players are not sure that's what they want, there's a good chance it's going to happen anyway. Because again, they're playing individuals first. I think it's a good idea for groups to make a coterie together so they can play off each other's strengths and know they're not if from the beginning they're creating just opposite characters that can get old, that could not be super fruitful for the overarching story. So you want to build characters that you know have the potential of getting along at least or working together, not even getting along. A lot of times it's fun if they don't get along, but they know they have to work together. As a storyteller, it's sort of your job is to give them the why they're working together and to give them sort of provide them with reasons for doing things with each other. That's sort of the balance between sort of the meta goals, the story goals, and then there's also like the personal character goals. And a lot of times, the personal character goals are one big way that PvP comes into play. So one such way, where players I feel like will start to scheme against each other, there's a difference between schemes and direct confrontations. And scheming, I think, that's sort of the sweet spot for this game because again, vampires are schemers, and if they're not schemers, someone's probably using them for their own schemes, whether they know it or like it or not. So you want to be aware of your individual schemes, and if one player has a scheme that's directly in combat or directly against another player, it's not necessarily a no, that can't happen as much as a sort of let's see how it plays out. And there's a way to do that sort of if hopefully all your players are mature and trust each other. And we have that happens where it happens openly on the table, where we'll go scene to scene, and in this scene, you'll see, oh, this person's working against them. So we all know it out of game, which sort of helps so there's no sort of bad feelings when it does happen, so you can sort of prepare. And not metagame, meaning, okay, I know he's actually doing this against me, so I'm going to do this. Just sort of, I kind of like to keep it above board. There's certain things that are fun to do in secret with your players. But when it comes to stuff like that, they should all trust each other. Hopefully they're good enough players not to metagame. So sort of have them be open on the table, ways you're working against each other. And then it's sort of fun too, I would think as a player to sort of see, like, eventually you're going to find this out. Eventually it's going to come to fruition. So there's sort of that anticipation too. So it's more of a fun anticipation than this dread of, oh, how are they screwing me over now?
Yeah, I think it's also a really good way to practice being a good player, that things are coming, and so how do you act like your character without metagaming and make it convincing and work out for this story, because at the end of the day you're all telling a collaborative story. So how are you doing that that is like honest and with integrity but also still like fun and passionate, and I think this game allows for that a lot because it's so social and so emotional. And so you do find out like your teammates or your coterie are doing things that are gonna directly fuck you up. And so and so how do you know that as a person and then play it with integrity as a character? And I think that's a really cool part of the game. And especially like the way we play it is, yeah, we know so and so is gonna hang out with vampire hunters and it's going to be a problem, but that's part of the fun is figuring out how to play that role with integrity and without metagaming.
Yeah, and how to find fun in that tension and fun in losing. In the sense that, I mean, Vampire's a big LARPing community. In a LARP, like when we went to a LARP, they talk about like, if you go into every interaction with someone being like, I'm going to get the better of you in this interaction, I'm going to come out triumphant, that's boring and it just doesn't feel real, and it's not really role-playing as much as just enforcing your will on other people. And I think a lot of that LARP ideal plays into even the tabletop. Is you have to be okay with, this isn't going to end up good for my character, but it's going to be fun and interesting. You have to learn to enjoy stuff like that and trust so that player is going to make choices that aren't just going to put an end to stories, but rather create new stories through the tension or create opportunities that hopefully someday will be resolved, or they'll always just be simmering there. Some rifts never really heal, and that's fun to roleplay that. That's still storytelling. PvP is a problem when it stops people from doing things, but when it's creating new opportunities, creating new drama, it can be encouraged and really played with.
Right, and I think that's also like a great way for you to think about your game as a larger story, like a larger piece of art if you want to be really dramatic about it. But
which we do.
Yes, that's my preference. But to think of your character as, part of the beats in the story. Like every choice you make adds a different arch and it moves the story in a different way. So having those conflicts, like that's what drama is. So you need to have those conflicts, and learning not to take it personally is, growing in maturity as just a human. So there's so many life lessons to be learned in this game. It's actually really good for you.
How to fight with your friends. That's a great life lesson.
I'm going to name my next book that.
Okay.
I have a lot of content.
That'll be a different video. PvP, I think, is also really cool for character development. I think you learn a lot about not only like the relationships between the different characters, but your character itself through some of those conflicts. I feel like when things are going well and you're all working together against enemies, I mean, some personal stories are going to be affected, but I think some of my favorite moments have been like when there's been like heated discussions or dramatic moments with the players themselves. And also, storyteller tip, it's a great way to not have to do anything for a while. If you just cause a problem,
that's why you let it happen so
with some
often.
of the characters, you sit back and you just let them go. And you just hang out. And they probably will create some beautiful story out of it. Or something that is real dramatic.
At least.
Or fun for you to watch the carnage. And you don't feel as bad for having caused it. And I think those are some of my favorite ones. Because, again, there's so much of, like, versus NPC stuff. But, again, it's as long as there's a way forward. Because, well, let's get into the other, the extreme of that is the scheming, there's disagreements. There's, again, you're dealing with your morality. And a lot of times you're going to be doing things that put other people in danger and stuff. And that danger could come to blows. Vampire is interesting in the sense that it's really easy to have those physical confrontations without permanent. Obviously, you're vampires. It's very hard to die. So you can have some cool like moments of violence against each other. That's, I mean, you'll eventually heal up. You won't kill them unless you put them in torpor. Which even then, torpor is not a permanent thing. So there's sort of a cool built-in safety net of like something happens, or I mean, the beast is in play too. Something that maybe wasn't going to get violent. The wrong dice happens, and suddenly it's violent because your beast came out, and now you're physically acting out against them. So you have more leeway with that in this game, to where there's not as much permanent consequences to that. It's more the social consequence. If you attack that person, you hurt them, obviously they're going to be fine eventually because they're vampires. You heal up and stuff, but it's still the act that you were willing to do that, or the act that you lost control and did that. Again, it's going to create something new to discuss and roleplay about.
Yeah, and just, I mean, the more social situations you have, the more chance for that to go wrong. And that's what this game is about. It's always going to go wrong eventually. The dice are going to go the wrong way. I know nothing about that, but I've heard that causes a lot of conflict in and of itself. And then just like you're selfish individuals, you're the worst of what the real world is. You're everything combined and the most selfish and unable to control your nature and all this kind of stuff. So it's obviously going to go somewhere bad eventually. And that's why we love it.
Yeah.
That's the best part.
Again, it's a lot of fun if you got the right people for it. And sometimes, like I said, it's going to come up naturally, I think. I can't think of many vampire games I've watched where there wasn't some of that tension. And I think even LA by Night, I don't think they've come to blows. They've come close.
They've done some scheming and wheeling.
Oh, they've schemed against each other
over.
And it's a game of secrets, too.
Yeah.
So, man, stuff gets revealed, things happen. And those are, again, some of my favorite moments. But there's also, you have to think about, we'll use a storyteller, can definitely create those moments with, because vampires are always trying to play others. So it's very easy for an individual character to get picked out from this faction to try to do this, or this vampire to do this, and we'll specifically, if they see this coterie is accomplishing things and they're useful, and maybe they're doing something against the vampire's interest, they're going to specifically threaten things or introduce things or manipulate things to create that tension.
Yeah.
So even if you go in thinking we're all getting along just fine, and you might start off super strong, other kindred will make sure to pull at those strings and try to create the drama if there wasn't any.
Yep.
And even for story reasons, say you all are super strong. Things in this game, there's things like dominate, presence. A vampire can make someone do something without their control, so whether they wanted to or not, they just did something against the party, and now you have to deal with that. Blood bonding's a thing too, to where a character could get attached to someone else. It's not really good for the coterie, and now they have to deal with that. So it's, again, loyalties and always shifting and trying to help yourself while helping the group it's gonna happen, whether it's comes naturally or an outside pressure purposely creates that tension. Thing to think about with this too is depending on the faction you're playing in the game. Certain things, like if you're playing a Camarilla game, there's going to be a lot bigger consequences and stuff like that. Obviously, you're in a city or setting with a lot of rules, and you can do this and you can do that, and someone's probably in charge of all of your characters, individually or as a group. So there's a lot bigger consequences for that, but also a lot more reason where you have to work together because someone stronger said so. So if that's something that you want a little more structure and you want there to be heavy external consequences for not getting along, Camarilla is a great way to go. Where Anarchs don't really have that. Obviously, you have reasons to work together, but the Anarch movement often doesn't work well together. And things happen. So there's a lot less of a, it's more of it's your own consequences that you create
Mm-hmm.
if that's the setting you decide to go for. Or if you start them neutral and you present the both options, it might be, well, I guess we didn't really talk about it before, but it's something to know, like if you have
Mm-hmm.
one vampire that's like, oh yeah, I'm 100% agree with this faction, and then a vampire, well, no, the anarchs are the ones that make sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of some of the big things you guys just sort of have to agree on, whether it's begrudgingly or not.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier in the LARP scene, one thing that they talked about a lot was like, why wouldn't your character do something? We're talking about taking L's.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, if for story's sake or just for being a good player, you can figure out a reason that your player would or wouldn't do something that might be different than what you originally thought. So that's an interesting thing to do because you're talking about making what's the word, concessions. Sometimes you have to make concessions, and we do that in real life all the time, so it's not a far stretch to say that your character in a coterie where they could die without them wouldn't make those concessions. So that's also something to kind of keep in the back of your head when you're playing and you're having conflict, and maybe it's not going anywhere because the conflict is kind of big. So thinking about like, how can you make concessions, take the L occasionally, use that for later drama. I'm a big fan of
Of the later
revenge
drama.
best served cold. So
Yeah.
those are a couple of things to think about as far as concessions go.
Yeah, that's a really good point in the fact that, if the conflict again is stopping the story, figure out instead of, I mean, this is a phrase that people hate to hear is, oh, it's what my character would do. it's at some point you're making things up, and it's okay to maybe I think it's more creative to figure out why they would do something than just be like, well, they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Again,
People are complicated. Characters are just as complicated, and let them be that.
Yeah. So if there is player tension stuff that seems like it's at an impasse or stopping, be that person who comes up with a cool reason. You know what? They would actually agree with this, or they would move past this because of this reason. Because the reason is they plan on killing them later or something.
So if you want to be an anarch and your group won't let you be, just pretend to be Camarilla, infiltrate the whole infrastructure, and take it down from inside.
Yeah, that's one scenario.
That's a concession.
That's something like that. There's also less extreme ways of doing that. But yeah, so again, enjoy the tension. I think tension's actually part of this. We enjoy it. Hopefully you do too. Make sure you have the right group of people for it. And all in all, just make sure it makes a cool story. That's all that really matters. Don't take it personally. Take your L's, but take it for the overall entertainment of everyone at the table, or the development of you as a person, since apparently we're learning life lessons.
Yes.
Or have it be a growth opportunity for your character to take that L or to come out of that tension. But yeah, that's a little bit about player versus player shenanigans and Vampire the Masquerade. Anything else?
No, I don't think so.
All right, we covered everything. You're welcome. Goodbye.